Hello everybody and welcome back to Mr. Matt's teaching channel. Today we're going to be covering a new topic in our A-level course, which is violence in sport. Very much related to our previous topic, which was ethics in sport, and they both go hand in hand. It's going to be a long unit, so this may or may not be covered in 1 or 2 videos, and we'll see how we get through as we go through. Okay, let's start with our learning objectives today. Hopefully they're on your screen and ready. So during this unit, we're going to be discussing the causes, so why people are violent and why do we see violent acts in sports in relation to both the performer, the spectator, and the sport itself. So 3 areas about causes and implications. We're also going to be looking at what kind of strategies are in place and by who to prevent violence from happening within the sporting domain, and how they related to both the performer and spectator. And finally, we're going to use our knowledge that we gather in this presentation to answer some examination questions. These objectives are very much linked to the specification from the AQA 2017 specification, which are on your screen now. And we'll be covering both of those with examples. Okay, straight away then. So you are sports students. You should have an interest in sports. You should be covering local news, national news, and international news related to sport on a weekly basis. And if you are doing that, you should be able to answer this question very easily, because in sport, during the sports season, very often we find that violence is reported in the media, both from the performer and the spectator. So can you think of any examples of violent acts that have happened over the last couple of years? Hopefully you can have some, because you're going to need those examples when we come to answer your longer answer questions. So I'll think about that. So we're looking for violent acts from the performer and violent acts from the spectator. Hopefully some ideas are coming into your head. We will be discussing a few of these examples as well today, so don't worry if you have not got those to hand just yet. Okay. These are just a couple of examples which I have come across over the last couple of years. So we'll take each one and give you a little bit of an overview to just show you what kind of things are happening. So let's take the first one. And if you are obviously watching this on YouTube, then you can follow these links on your own, and you can get some further details from the presentation, which has been shared in the comment box and description below. So let's take you to the first one. Okay. This first one was from a game which happened 2018, December 2018. This was between Arsenal and Tottenham Hotspurs. So when we're watching and going through some of these examples, start to think about the reasons why violence may have happened, and what are the reasons that are given by the players and the managers. So this is Mauricio Pochettino, who was the Tottenham manager at the time, and he has got a few things to say on this matter about his explanation. So just to give you some context, it was a very heated game, and it resulted in a 4-2 defeat by Arsenal. And during the game, we had Eric Dyer, who was involved in an incident which was picked up, and let's see what Pochettino had to say about that.
It's not easy. It's true that I was far away, and then I ran. When I arrived, was late. Difficult to see what happened there. I tried to watch by TV, but it's a situation that is difficult to control the emotion and what happened. We'll see what is going to the FA charge, or I think it's under investigation, and we see what is going on now.
Have you spoken to Eric Dyer, or did you feel as if his action was particularly provocative?
Look, to be honest, I didn't talk with him, because when you do something and then it's so evident the action or that happened after, I think you can take in one or another direction. If you are a Tottenham fans, you take in some direction. If you are Arsenal fan, you take it in one direction. If you are the manager of Tottenham, the manager of Arsenal, the player involved in there, player that were doing the warm up, Arsenal, you are going to back our player or our things that happen, but it's not sense now to talk too much, because now it's about to accept what the FA is going to charge or not. Is under investigation, and if we do something wrong, it's normal to pay.
Okay, so you may or may not have taken a few things from that interview. So he is the Tottenham Hotspur's manager, or was at the time. So classic manager, not really saying that he saw the incidents directly, saying he didn't really see it. But what he did say was that it was difficult for his players to control their emotions during the game. So think about why that might be the case. Why do professional athletes, professional players, why are they unable to control their emotions during this particular game between Arsenal and Spurs? Okay, moving on to our next example. Just get that up for you. So our next example is this one. So again, this was April 2019. So very recent, so the last couple of years. 3 people stabbed in Glasgow after Celtic versus Rangers match. So what do you think led to 3 people being stabbed after a football match? Why is that the case? Why are fans fighting against each other? What are the reasons behind that? So if you don't know, so Celtic and Rangers are both Scottish teams, and they have a lot of history behind them. There are also conflicts of religion based around both teams. And following the game, which Celtic won 2-1, so a very close game, fans were obviously aggrieved, and fights took place outside of the stadium and in the surrounding areas. So here it says in a bar and a street. They're also both things which are very significant when we come to talk about violence in sport. Around 15 people were involved and 3 people were stabbed. Okay, so I'll think about why that why was that the case? Okay, next article which I found was this particular one, and I'll give you some context about this as well. So 11 people arrested following violence at Port Vale versus Stoke City. Now, if you don't know these teams, I do very well, because it is actually from my hometown of Stoke City, Stoke-on-Trent. So these two are both from the city of Stoke-on-Trent, so they are local rivals. And Stoke City at this time, so this was 2018, are and were in a higher division than Port Vale. and they hadn't played each other for a long period of time. And this was in a cup game, and following the game, there was actually damage, vandalism, which happened to the Port Vale's ground, and there were seats ripped up, toilets smashed up, and it was a very sorry scene. So it ended in a 4-0 win to the home side, Port Vale, which is a bit of a shock because Stoke City were above them in the leagues and have a far superior team. So the violence broke out in the away area, which led to damage to the stadium and to the area. So this is a little video here about what kind of damage was caused. So all the toilets smashed up, windows smashed as well. So it's not a very good sight and not a very good advert for football and for the fans of Stoke City. So bringing them into disrepute. So why did that happen? Why do you think? What are the reasons they gave? So that's spectator violence. And our final one is also related to spectator violence in a different kind of category here than Stoke City and Port Vale. This was in the Champions League quarter-final between Ajax and Juventus. Over 130 arrests were made after violence broke out. So if you don't know, so the Champions League is probably what club sides would see as the greatest tournament in the world, in Europe in particular. And it's the highest level, so the champions of each division and the top teams within each division around Europe play each other. So it's very much a big spectacle. And what you see here, so we've got teams from different countries. So Ajax is from Holland, so Dutch team versus Juventus in Italy, and the fans coming together and there's violence. So let's give you a little play of this video to set the scene about what is happening outside the stadium.
Ik begrijp niet dat ze nu niet gewoon die plek waar ze die zeven gaan halen, dat ze dat dan gewoon blokken.
So, the description says that flares and missiles were thrown at police and other spectators who responded with water cannons, and you'll see this vehicle here is a water cannon vehicle, which is generally deployed during riots to try to disperse crowds. And missiles, when we talk about missiles in relation to football fans and hooligans, we're talking about anything which can be thrown. So that can be a brick, it can be a piece of wood, it can be a coin. It's been known that darts have been thrown as well during the breakouts of violence in the crowd. So anything which can be thrown, bottles, they're all classed as missiles. So 130 fans were arrested. So that's significant violence. That's on one of the biggest spectacles of club football. So why is that happening? So from all those four examples, why is that happening? Start thinking about that and start asking yourselves that question. Why are fans fighting each other? Why are players fighting each other? What is the reason behind that? And we'll discuss some of those reasons in our presentation today. Get it back up for you. Okay. So we're looking at the performer first. So the cause of violence from the performer. So what we just discussed can you think of any? What are the reasons why a player might give? What are the reasons that a player might give for giving a violent act in sport? So these are some of the reasons which are given. So they have a high win ethic. So they want to win, sometimes at all costs. So having that desire to win may influence their acts and their behaviour on the field of play. The importance of competitions. Now, I've put in brackets there perceived importance because, you know, how important is a game of football? Some may say it's very important. Some may say it's very minor in compared to other problems around the world, especially at this current time. So what is the importance of the competition? Now, you could argue that obviously some games have more importance than others. So if we're looking at cup finals or big competitions like the Champions League, then you may argue that they have more importance. And that is one of the reasons which is given for breakouts of violence. If we look at the Spurs versus Arsenal one, although it's just a league game, you might argue that it's got more importance because it's a local derby between two clubs which have lots of history. Same with the Celtic Rangers game. Increased media coverage and hype from the media. So if a game's built up in the media, online and newspapers, on reports, and they build these games up, especially with the local games or the cup finals, and especially if media use, which they have been known to in the past, if they use kind of fighting talk during their reports, like, for example, Manchester United are battling against Manchester City, or they're going to war. So this kind of rhetoric would generally increase the likelihood of violence occurring, both in the performers and spectators. Social learning. So if we relate it to psychology and sociology here, so the social learning theory of Bandura, if we take it back to the Bobo doll and of the children playing with the doll and as normal, and then they observe an adult going in, hitting the doll, then it was more likely that when the children returned to the play centre, they would copy those acts. So it has been shown that there is social learning involved, and that is from historical means. So if they've seen their parents, for example, or significant others, or just friends get involved in violence, then other people are more likely to do that. And that's very relevant to spectator violence as well. Pressure on the performer. So can the players control their emotions? If we relate it to Pochettino, what he said, can they handle the pressure being put on the performers? Is it fair to expect that the players and performers themselves should carry the burden of all this pressure that's put on them from themselves, the manager, the coach, the nation, their sponsors? So is that something which should be handled a bit better, maybe, if we start to also think about what can be done better to prevent violence happening? Start linking these together already. It could be argued, so we said it could be social learning. Well, you could argue potentially, and it has been argued in the past, that it's actually inherent. So some people have just a predisposition, and genetic makeup that they are just violent individuals. So you can maybe argue that point, that it's inherent in themselves, and they'll never be able to control their emotions and violent outbursts because it's part of their genetics. For some players, it can also be seen, and this is a very controversial one, is that it's a self-identity. And in fact, it could also be related to teams as well, so not just players. And I'm relating this back to, if you don't know who he is, I suggest you go research him and this team, is Vinnie Jones. and the Crazy Gang, as they called themselves, which was Wimbledon football team back in the 90s, 80s and 90s. So Vinnie Jones actually has made a very, very profitable career out of a self-identity of being a bit of a hard man in football. And if you put in Google Vinnie Jones, Paul Gascoigne, you will actually see a great image of during a football match, Vinnie Jones actually grabbing Paul Gascoigne's genitalia to basically put him off his game and trying to disrupt his flow. So that's the kind of things which players do. They do. So they have put in hard tackles, and they put in they create violent acts. And if we kind of think about some people as well who may have done several outbursts of violence, you know, in the modern game, my mind goes straight away to someone like Luis Suarez, the biting king, who's done that many times, who's very controversial, but maybe that's part of his self-identity as a player. This is a very common one, which is given. So frustrations of referee decisions. If we're playing in a very important game and you're on your game and you're in the zone, and then all of a sudden the referee makes a controversial decision which you don't agree with, then that may higher your stress levels. And if your stress levels get too high, you might create or give an outburst of these violent acts. We'll discuss referee decisions a little bit later, because that's definitely in the how violence can be prevented. Abuse from opponents and spectators. That may lead to violent acts, and in fact I'm going to be showing you three examples of this being the case in the next couple of slides. So abuse from opponents and spectators can absolutely lead to violent acts being displayed, and one of the major reasons, in fact. Okay, let's have a look at this first one. Zinedine Zidane on the world stage, the most important football game in the world, the World Cup final.
With penalties looming, words are exchanged between the France captain and Marco Materazzi. Whatever is said, Zidane's reaction is extreme. Fans around the world can barely
let's just watch that. Watch that one again.
In the last exchanges,
So quick
with
look
penalty action
here.
is extreme.
Zinedine Zidane. Headbutts a Italian player on the world stage in the 2006 World Cup final. Now, we're talking about here a player who was arguably one of the best players in the world, and still is regarded as one of the greats of his era. And on the world stage, he was unable to control his emotions and lashed out with a violent act. That was coincidentally the last game he actually played as a professional footballer. He was retiring after the World Cup. But what led to him creating that headbutt, and his justification was that the Italian player said something rather rude to him about a family member. So that tipped him over the edge. And you think about the pressure he was already feeling at this time in the World Cup and the importance of the game, and then the weight of the nation on his shoulders. And then that little comment was just too much for Zinedine Zidane. Okay, next one is Eric Cantona.
Trying to get on his way, had a little kick at Shaw there out of frustration. the morning headline. Eric Cantona. 4 times he walked last season. 3 times he walked last season. Once more in a pre-season game. And now for the 5th time in his Manchester United career, Eric Cantona is sent off. The referee, and it was the twice for the twice for any goal. Everybody was kung fu fighting. Those kids were fast as lightning. In fact, it was a little bit frightening.
So let's just watch this in case you missed what's happening here. So I'll give you a little bit of background. So Eric Cantona, arguably once again one of the most influential players of his time, a fantastic player, but with hot-headed temper. So he was just sent off for a foul. So he was frustrated with the referee's decision already, and as he was walking towards the tunnel to go for an early bath, as they say, he had some abuse from a spectator, and unfortunately that was a little bit too much for old Eric Cantona, and he decided to kung fu kick that player, as we're going to be seeing here.
Everybody was kung fu fighting. Those kids were fast as lightning.
So that's Eric Cantona. Make sure you remember that example and that name. And our final one is Patrice Evra.
Marseille's Patrice Evra was sent off even before his side's Europa tie against Victoria had started after kicking an angry fan during the team's warm-up. The former Manchester United star sparked the confrontation after reacting to cheers from the away end. From there, the situation deteriorated. News Desk.
Okay, so this is Patrice Evra. That example was Patrice Evra, who was receiving abuse from opposition fans. In fact, actually, I think it was his own fans who were abusing him, part of the ultras from Marseille, and he went across to them and he kicked one in the face. So, as you can imagine, as a professional, you're not allowed to do that, and he got a lot of backlash from his actions. So, but on the flip side, you could potentially argue, as a professional, should they be taking that abuse as a spectator? Are they allowed to give abuse to their players and nothing gets done about it? So let's look at a few things that what were the consequences behind some of these actions, and then you can decide whether they were strong enough. So Eric Cantona, Kung Fu kick master. So he was, for his actions, he was banned for 9 months from participating in football and representing his club. So 9 months for fly kicking a spectator. He was fined £20,000 British pounds. He's stripped of his captaincy, and he was dropped from the French national team. So the questions are, were these punishments enough? Do you think they should be stronger? Do you think they were too harsh? Do you think they're going to be deterring acts of violence in the future? Some questions there to think about. And coincidentally, I've just realised that all of these 3 players are French. That is a coincidence. I'm not saying that French people have more violent tempers as professional footballers, but Zinedine Zidane, Eric Cantona, and Patrice Evra were all French national players at the time. What I will say, if we relate this to social learning theory, because this incident happened when I was growing up, as a child, and I can remember this very fondly. Think about what might have happened around the country, around the world, following this incident. And I can tell you that the week after this incident, there was a lot of fly kicking and kung fu kicks happening from children who were basically following the examples of Mr. Cantona. Okay, Patrice Evra, what happened to him? So he was banned for a year for the whole season. For the whole season, he was unable to compete until June the 30th, 2018. He was actually sacked by Marseille, so they terminated his contract. Marseille themselves were also fined €25,000 for failing to control their own fans. So again, was that enough? Do you think that was strong enough? We've got to really think about the financial penalties. Were they strong enough? Were they harsh enough for professional footballers who were earning millions of pounds a year? So there's 3 examples. Try to remember a couple of those. And they were examples of player on player and player on spectator. So what strategies are in place to try to reduce violent acts? Who's creating these strategies and what is in place? So first of all, we're seeing additional officials which are being introduced in certain sports which have these violent acts. So if we talk about football in particular, we are receiving a 4th official. In certain games, there's more linesmen who are patrolling the goal line in Europe, for example, European competitions. There's also now the use of technology to ensure that correct decisions are made. And hopefully you're aware of VAR, Video Assistant Referee, which basically has cameras situated all around the stadium, and they can pick up pretty much every act that happens. So if a referee does miss something on the field of play, then the technology can help the referee make the decisions. Now this is very, very important, because if the correct decision is made, then the player is less likely to be frustrated. So if we link it to the frustration aggression hypothesis, so they can't really be frustrated if it's the correct decision that was made. They kind of be frustrated with themselves for making a mistake, but if the decision is correct, it's less likely to lead to frustrations. There's lots of other frustrations though about video assistant referees, such as delaying the time and disrupting the flow of the game. Other strategies, so we could also, if we're staying on officials, we can also ensure that referees and officials are qualified and experienced, and that rests with the national governing bodies to make sure that that is the case. And when we talk about sport and the law a little bit later in our few units time, we'll see that actually some of the reasons for law cases were down to negligent officials. So it is the responsibility of the national governing bodies to make sure that the officials are up to scratch and well qualified and experienced. We can obviously support decisions made, which we've kind of discussed, but we can also, if it's not picked up in the game, we can now take retrospective action on missed violent acts. Now, this is very important that you know this word and what it means. Retrospective action basically means action which is taken following the game. So if it's not picked up during the game, you can still get fined and suspended due to retrospective action taken. So, for example, if I was a player and during the game I elbowed somebody in the face and it looked like it was intentional, but it wasn't picked up during the game, but it was picked up by cameras, following the game, there might be an investigation into that act, and I might receive a suspension of maybe 3 games, which is equivalent to a red card during the game. Other strategies, punishments of players. So the referee is allowed to punish players. So if you're doing a violent act during the game, then you're likely to receive a straight red card if it's an intentional violent act of a sending off. So you will take no more part in that game, and you'll be suspended for a couple of games following, depending on appeals. You can also punish a player on the bench or a manager. So if they are creating violent acts, such as verbal abuse as well, they can be sent off. Promoting good role models is very important, especially if we relate that to social learning theory. So if we've got good role models to follow, then there's less likely to have acts. And again, that's responsibility of not only the national governing bodies themselves, but also the clubs to promote those role models. Fair play awards are also awarded to clubs with good disciplinary records. We've already mentioned about these fair play awards in our ethics in sports. So if you have a good record as a club, you will get this fair play award. I'm relating this to football, so you get a FIFA Fair Play Award, and you will be granted access to the European competition if you have not already qualified for it. And I'm relating this to Premier League, English Premier League teams here. Training for player management. So how to diffuse situations between players. And this should really be linked in at club level. And we already listened to our first video, which talked about Mauricio Pochettino talked about his players were unable to control their emotions. Well, this is a prime example of how you can diffuse a situation for violence, is by helping them with strategies to lower their frustration and stress level. So how can you give that decision and try to help them not to make violence acts? Also, if you related this to the manager themselves, so the manager themselves has a very important role to play here in reducing violent acts, because if I'm a manager and I've got a good knowledge of my players, and I see that one of my players is getting frustrated, maybe this particular player has a history of or a tendency for violent acts, maybe the best thing to do is actually substitute that player at that time, so nothing actually occurs on the field of play. And also there are campaigns that are led by, for example, national governing bodies, for example, the FA Football Respect campaign, which we'll be talking about in a second, showing you a few of these videos. So you've got a 10-minute task. Please pause this video and then come back to it once you've completed this task. So research the FA Respect campaign. So we want to know what it is, who runs it, what kind of level they're targeting, who they are targeting, and what outcomes it's trying to achieve. So we've got 5 things to think about here. The FA Respect campaign, and try to find out as many details as possible, because you can use that as one of your examples in the longer answer questions. So that's the FA Respect campaign. Please pause this video now, because we're about to move on to our next slide. Okay.
How much abuse do you have to put up with each week?
Before we move on to this video, hope you've already researched it and you've come back to it now. Let's talk about the campaign. These are a couple of videos I've got to show you about the campaign, and it's targeting a whole perspective of participation levels from the foundation-based pyramid all the way through to elite. It's targeting fans, it's targeting players, and it's looking at respect to each other and respect for the referee, respect for the game. It's basically trying to respect everyone within football. So this is one promotional video of many, by the way, that they have done.
You know, people shouting at you. Get out there and do it! Having a pop. You ain't got no commitment, son! Swearing and that. I am bloody sick of it! What, none? You ain't showing pride? That's because you wouldn't put up with it, would you? You let yourself, Dad! I mean, people like you and me, we wouldn't stand for it, would we? You let the team down, but then you let me down. We're not kids, are we? This is the last time! The last time! Look at me! Did you know? You don't want it enough! Over half our young footballers. Now you get out there and you fight for the ball. Have to put up with pressure. God, make me proud. And abuse. You ain't got nothing, son. From their elders. Why don't you just grow up? And bet us. Any time we gave it a rest. Open your eyes! My woman can referee this campaign! Listen to this muppet. Every week he does this, screaming and shouting at the ref. Ref! That's a yellow card, ref! Card him! Yellow card him, yellow card! How are these kids supposed to learn the game if you don't know the game? He's an animal. Give him a yellow. Look at the ref. But he gives up his Saturday mornings to do this. Now, was it the right decision? It might have been, it might not have been. Who knows? We all make mistakes. You mug! Would you take this at work? No.
Okay, thank you.
No, don't thank me. Thank you.
Just clear the playing area, please.
You ain't got a clue.
All right.
Clown. You see, Dad's trying to live out his own dreams through his son. Get it? What's the matter with you? That's a suicidal boy. And how's he supposed to learn if he can't make his own mistakes? Referee, you're not watching the game, mate. You're watching me. You ain't going to see nothing here. It's no wonder we're losing so many refs when they're having to put up with people like Jet the Biscuit here every week. Come on, Stevie! You're running about like a chicken with no head. Liven it up! And it's no wonder thousands of kids give up the game either. We carry on like this, we won't have a game left. Ref! Ref? Some of us need to take a long, hard look at ourselves.
Okay, that first one is a very powerful video and clip here. So obviously they are targeting abuse against children and abuse against the referee, and you know, their tagline at the end, lose respect, lose the game, is very important. Let's move on to our next campaign video from the FA, Respect. Okay, and that's a very good campaign video, and hopefully you were starting to think about campaign videos we discussed in AS and what campaigns are about. So any kind of campaign, what they're trying to do. So first of all, they're trying to raise awareness about the issue. Number two, they're trying to break stereotypes, and this is true for all campaigns. So raise awareness, break stereotypes, educate people, and hopefully the final one is they're going to try to make a difference, make a positive change. So that's the Respect campaign. And what I was saying is, in that video, you would have seen all of the kind of minority groups we talked about, because they're also trying to promote them at the same time. So we had females in football there, we had disabled athletes, we had ethnic minorities, all featuring in that video campaign. Another little 10-minute task for you. Again, you're going to need to pause this video and go and complete this task. So 10 minutes, you've got 10 minutes ideally, but obviously if you need longer time, you can take longer and come back to this video when you can. So press pause on the video, go and research and find examples of retrospective action being taken for violent acts in football. It shouldn't take you too long, but it's good to have these banks of examples to bring into your longer answer questions. So what is it? Who makes decisions about retrospective action? What are the consequences in that particular example you find? And give specifics. So who are the players? What are the games that they were taking part in? What are the consequences? So try to find as many examples as possible. 10-minute task. Pause this video, and I'll see you once you are completed. Okay, we're going to be moving on. So staying with strategies then to prevent performer and violence in particular, national governing bodies, they're very keen to protect their reputation. They try to deal with violence in-house and not to let it get outside of the football domain, for example, within police or the court of law, because it's only going to be giving a negative reputation for the sport itself. So if we're relating this to sport, so national governing bodies, they try to deal with it in-house. But should they be able to? That's the question. If violence happens on the field of play, if someone turns around and punches someone in the face, should that be taken to a court of law? Well, if that happened in the streets, then that's going to happen in the public. It would be taken to court, and someone would get, well, they would get the consequences of the law if they were found guilty, and likely to lead to, depending on the severity, but police caution or jail time or a fine or compensation. So should that also be the case in sport? Should they allowed to be able to deal with it in-house? And that's a question for you to think about. If a sport is taken to court or players, then with that negative media, then it may affect sponsors of the sponsor of the players or the sport itself if they're seen in a bad light, because it's going to give a negative public image of that sponsor. We think about commercialization in sport. If we bring in a few more topics here, we know that the reason why sponsors give money to sports and players is because they want to be seen as in a positive image within the public. So if all of a sudden that media coverage is negative, then it's likely to affect the sponsors given. And when we move into our drugs and sports unit next as well, we will find that if players, competitors and athletes are found guilty of taking performance-enhancing drugs, then the sponsors are likely to withdraw their sponsorship deals, such as Lance Armstrong. But back to violence in sports. There are some cases, however, of the legal system getting involved, and we will go through a couple of these examples. This is the video assistant referee. Just to show you a bit more knowledge about VAR, because you need to know about how this can be responsible for tackling spectator violence. So it's going to help officials make the correct decision and reduce the frustration and hopefully therefore the aggression demonstrated by players. So this is video assistant referee, how it works, what it does. So that was video assistant referee. We've also got goal line technology to help referees as well. Okay, both of those technologies in sports, if we relate it to our direct technology and sport units, many things, many advantages can be gained from integrating technology in sports. Number one, getting the correct decisions, of course. Number two, to making the game more exciting, involvement with spectators and fans, interaction between competitors and players as well. And so the reason why it's good is obviously it's going to make the correct decision and reduce the frustrations and therefore, hopefully, the aggression shown on the pitch. But there has been some resistance from football associations to introduce technology because they feel they're slowing the game down. So do you think actually technology in sports is a good thing, or is it a bad thing that's happening at the moment? So is it good or is it bad for technology to be integrated into sports? There have been debates on both sides. Some arguments for, some arguments against. I think the general consensus is that it is a good thing to integrate technology, but it needs to be done in the right manner. And there have been some teething problems, especially with VAR in the English Premier League in the first season. But on the whole, I think it's well received because they are getting the correct decisions generally, not all the time, the majority of the time. So what more can be done? What more can be done to stop player violence? What do you think? Do you think these are good things, or do you think these are bad things? Do you think they're too harsh, or do you think they're not harsh enough? So should we be giving higher financial fines to players and clubs? You know, if a English Premier League player, if they get fined, for example, £100,000, so to the average person, that's a lot of money. But to many of these top professionals in the English Premier League, that could be less than 1 week's wages. If you're a high performer, even if you are with one of the lower performers, it's still going to be less than a month's wage. So is that harsh enough? Should the fine be related to the amount of money that player particularly earns? Should it, for example, be like 1 month's wage or 2 months' wages? Should it be financial, or should it be something else? Should it be banning of players? So we saw how Cantona was banned for 9 months, and our Patrice Evra was banned for the rest of the season for those incidents. Is that long enough? Do they need to be longer? Something you can think about, and you need to have these examples and these ideas for those, especially for the long answer questions which talk about violence in sport and how the authorities and what more can be done. You need to give these kind of examples, so make sure you remember these. Deduction of points for teams if, for example, they've got a bad disciplinary record or there's specific incidents. So rather than hitting the club or the players with fines, actually the points deduction is probably going to have more an effect, because not only is it going to be financial at the end of the season, because teams get paid depending on where they finish, but also might mean the difference between promotion and relegation for some teams. Should we just relegate teams straight away due to violence acts? Do you think that's fair? Or do you think that that's too harsh? Or do you think just because the individual is being violent, should that reflect on the whole team? Should we be giving prison sentences to players rather than just fines and bans? Should it go through the legal system? These are all kind of questions you should have. Or should we actually give lifetime bans for players who have brought the game into disrepute? Would that stop violence happening, or would it still continue as it is? So these kind of questions you need to consider and think about and remember for your longer answer questions. Some examples now of incidents which have happened in sports but have escaped the sport's control of the incident and went through the court system and resulted in in court cases with fines or bans or prison sentences issued by the courts. Go and research this one. So John Terry versus Anton Ferdinand, what happened? This is related to racism in sports, not directly related to violence, but the reason why, as you can see, the spillover from sports when it's not contained within the national governing bodies, and the amount of press and media attention it gets, and how it can bring the sport and the players into disrepute. So go have a check out of John Terry versus Anton Ferdinand. At the time when John Terry was playing for England and Chelsea, and Anton Ferdinand for Queen's Park Rangers, both English players, and caused a big rift, especially as Rio Ferdinand was also John Terry's teammate and central defender for England at the time. So go have a look at that. The other one we're going to look at is Duncan Ferguson.
In April 1994, with Rangers cruising to victory against relegation-doomed Wraith Rovers, Duncan Ferguson became involved with Rovers defender Jock McStay. His headbutt went unpunished by the officials, but someone with a bit more power than an SFA referee was watching.
Rangers' Duncan Ferguson has been charged with assaulting Wraith Rovers player John McStay.
Okay, so if you didn't quite see this, I'll just play a little bit of the clip. Just have a look when they both come together to see what happens. On the right here, this is Duncan Ferguson. Again, this is a clip from the 1990s or 1980s, late 80s, early 90s. So this is Duncan Ferguson, and this is Jock McStay. So what actually happened during this game?
In April 1994, with Rangers cruising to victory against relegation-doomed Wraith Rovers, Duncan Ferguson became involved with Rovers defender Jock McStay.
There we go. You saw that there's a headbutt there from Duncan Ferguson. So at the time, it's actually there was no cards given to him during the game, and this was kind of before retrospective action was brought in. So there was no on-field action whatsoever, but there was a court case that was brought about for common assault, because technically he's headbutted a player. That shouldn't really happen, and if that happened in the streets, then he would go to court and go to prison. And so he was brought to court, and it resulted in a 3-month prison sentence for Duncan Ferguson. So is that deserved? Should it stay within the sport? So have a think about these questions. Should this stay within the sport? What happened on the pitch, stay in the pitch, shake hands after the game and move on? Or should we be convicting players who lash out? And you think about the reasons why they're lashing out. We talked about at the start of this presentation about the importance, about the pressure. Do we feel that these players should have all that pressure? Do you think it's just human nature to lash out if something happens during the game? We're also going to be talking about Duncan Ferguson and Jock McStay in our sport and the law topic area as well. Okay, it is an hour of our presentation. We are going to hold it there before we look at football violence related to the spectator and football hooliganism, because that is a big topic on its own as well. So I hope you've enjoyed the presentation today. Go back and research all of those tasks that I've asked you to do, and make sure that you take away from this presentation related to the player, what the reasons behind violent acts, what can be done, who to reduce these violent acts, who by. So we got national governing bodies, campaigns promoting role models. We got them also training up referees, making sure that the correct decision is made. We've got the use of technology, video assistant referees. We've got goal line technology to make sure the correct decision is made. We've got bans, we've got fines, we've got points deductions. Is that enough? Are we not doing enough, or should there be more that is done? So hope you've enjoyed the presentation today. I'm Mr. Matt, and this has been Violence in Sport presentation number 1. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you again very shortly for number 2.